Proud businessman invites his ex to his luxurious wedding, but she shows up with 3 children identical to him. Mark Anderson adjusted his tie for the 10th time while watching guests arrive for the ceremony. His heart was racing, not from the emotion of the moment with his current wife Jennifer, but from the anticipation of seeing his ex's face when she walked through that door. He had calculated everything meticulously. The party would be the perfect setting to show her how he had prospered since they ended their relationship 10 years ago. "Is everything okay, honey? You seem nervous," asked Jennifer, approaching elegantly in her champagne silk dress. "I'm great, just making sure everything is perfect," he replied, running his hand through his hair. The mansion they had rented on the outskirts of Lancaster was the perfect venue for the event. After all, it was his hometown, where everyone knew him as the pharmacist's son who had become a successful man in the big city. Returning as a winner and showing everyone how he had prospered was part of the plan. And inviting Sarah through mutual friends had been the final touch. The master of ceremonies announced the entrance of the bride and groom. Mark offered his arm to Jennifer, a successful executive he had met at one of his construction projects in Chicago. She was beautiful, intelligent, and perfectly represented the image he wanted to project, a powerful and enviable couple. Mrs. Eleanor, Mark's mother, watched everything with an apprehensive look from the front row. At 70, she maintained the elegant posture of someone who had always been respected in the small town. Her husband, Mr. Harold, seated beside her, seemed distant, as if something deeply troubled him. As the officiant began to speak about love and commitment, Mark discreetly scanned the hall looking for his ex, Sarah. That's when the side door opened and she entered. She wasn't alone. Sarah Miller, now 38, entered accompanied by 3 teenagers, 2 boys and a girl. The hall immediately filled with murmurs. Mark felt his legs weaken. The 3 young people had the same face shape as him, the same strong chin, the same almond-shaped green eyes he had inherited from his Portuguese grandmother. "Who are those children with Sarah?" whispered Jennifer, noticing the change in her husband's expression. Mark couldn't answer. The officiant stopped speaking, noticing the commotion forming. Sarah walked calmly to an empty seat, with the 3 teenagers following her. They're her children," he finally stammered. "And why is everyone looking at you both?" Jennifer insisted, her voice now tense. "My God, they look just like you, Mark," she exclaimed, loud enough for everyone to hear. The silence that followed was deafening. Mark felt the blood drain from his face as he watched his perfect life crumble before his eyes. Jennifer took a step back, looking from her husband to the children repeatedly, understanding the situation. "I can explain," Mark began, but didn't know how to continue. Sarah remained seated, dignified, with her 3 children beside her. The tallest of the boys, who appeared to be about 15 years old, stared at Mark with a mixture of curiosity and resentment. "There's nothing to explain," interrupted Mrs. Eleanor with a trembling voice. I paid for her to leave when I found out about the pregnancy. Mark was about to secure financing for his first construction project, and a child would ruin all the plans." The guests gasped in unison. Jennifer brought her hand to her mouth, horrified. "You did what?" asked Mark, incredulous, turning to his mother. "I gave her money to disappear and never contact you again," continued Mrs. Eleanor, now with tears in her eyes. "She came to me when you had already gone to Chicago, saying she was pregnant. I did what I thought was best for your future." Mark felt the floor disappear beneath his feet. The room began to spin. The voices around him seemed distant, as if he were submerged in water. The last thing he saw was Jennifer's worried face as everything darkened around him. When he woke up, he was in one of the mansion's bedrooms. Jennifer wasn't there, but Mr. Harold was sitting in an armchair near the bed. "What happened?" asked Mark, trying to sit up. "You fainted," his father replied dryly. "And now the whole town knows you have 3 children you never acknowledged." Mark rubbed his face, remembering the scene at the altar. Suddenly, a concern hit him. "Where's Jennifer?" Mr. Harold hesitated before answering. "She's downstairs, talking to Sarah." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. Mark got up quickly, ignoring the dizziness he felt. He hurried down the stairs, finding most of the guests still present, grouped in small circles, whispering and casting glances in his direction. At the back of the hall, he saw Jennifer sitting at a table with Sarah and the 3 teenagers. They were talking seriously. He approached hesitantly, feeling all eyes following his movements. When he reached the table, the conversations immediately ceased. "Jennifer, he began, but was interrupted. "Not now, Mark," his wife said with a coldness he had never seen before. "I'm having an important conversation." The teenager, who seemed to be the oldest of the 3, looked at him with his chin raised, in a gesture that Mark recognized as something he himself did when nervous, but trying to show confidence. "This is Ryan," Sarah calmly introduced. "And these are Michael and Emily, the triplets." Triplets? The word echoed in Mark's mind like a hammer. It wasn't just one child he had abandoned, but 3. 3 young people who carried his blood, his features, his history. "I didn't know," he murmured, not knowing how to complete the sentence. "Of course you didn't know," Sarah replied with dignity. "You left before I could confirm the pregnancy. And when I discovered I was expecting triplets and tried to contact you, your mother had already found me." Ryan, who seemed to be the spokesperson for the 3, looked directly at Mark. "We didn't come here to ruin your day or ask for anything," he said with surprising maturity for someone his age. "Mom always told us about you, without anger or bitterness. She said that one day, when we were ready, we could look for you if we wanted. When we received the invitation to this party, we thought it was you who was ready to meet us." Mark felt a mixture of shame and admiration for the way the young man expressed himself. "But there's something else you need to know," continued Ryan, hesitating for the first time. His voice faltered slightly. "I have aplastic anemia. It's a condition where the bone marrow stops producing enough blood cells." Sarah held her son's hand, giving him strength to continue. "I've been in treatment for 2 years, but the doctors say I need a bone marrow transplant. Michael and Emily aren't compatible. Our best chance," he took a deep breath, "is you." The silence that followed was heavy. Jennifer looked at Mark with an expression that mixed disappointment and expectation, as if she were evaluating his reaction to make a final decision about the man she had married. Before Mark could respond, Mrs. Eleanor approached the table, still visibly shaken. "I didn't know about the illness," she said, addressing Sarah. "You should have contacted me again." "For what?" Sarah replied calmly. "To receive more money in exchange for silence. I built my life without your help, Mrs. Eleanor. I graduated in nursing, raised my children with dignity, and never taught them to hate the father they never knew." Emily, the girl, who had remained silent until then, suddenly stood up. She had the same green eyes as Mark, framed by long dark eyelashes. "We came here because Ryan needs help," she said firmly. "Not to destroy your perfect family or to embarrass you. If you want to help us, great. If not, we'll understand. We've survived without you until now." The teenager's raw sincerity hit Mark like a punch. He saw in her the same determination that Sarah had always had, combined with a frankness he recognized as his own. I didn't know any of this," he finally said, "but I want to help. I'll do whatever is necessary." Jennifer abruptly stood up, grabbing her purse. "I'll leave you to talk," she said dryly. "It seems you have a lot to discuss." "Jennifer, please," Mark begged, trying to hold her arm, but she dodged. "Don't touch me," she replied with teary eyes. "You made me believe we were perfect, that there were no secrets between us. And now I discover that you ran away when you found out you would be a father. How can I trust you after that?" She walked toward the exit, stopping only to say something in Sarah's ear, who nodded slightly. Then, before the astonished gazes of the remaining guests, Jennifer Anderson left her own vow renewal party, alone. The rest of the night was a blur for Mark. The guests left discreetly, some offering words of support, others simply avoiding looking in his direction. Sarah explained that she now lived in Bethesda, where she worked at the university hospital. They exchanged phone numbers, and she promised to send Ryan's medical details so Mark could begin compatibility tests. When he was finally alone in the rented mansion, Mark sat on the main staircase, trying to process how his life had completely changed in a matter of hours. That's when he noticed his father, Mr. Harold, standing at the entrance to the hall watching him. "I always knew," said the older man, with a voice heavy with disappointment. "What?" "About the grandchildren. Your mother told me years later, when it was too late to do anything about it. I let her make the decision and carried that secret with me ever since." Mark looked at his father, a man he had always respected and admired, but who now seemed as fragile and guilty as he himself. "Why did you never tell me anything?" "Because I agreed that you needed to follow your path, build your empire," Mr. Harold replied bitterly. "What a terrible mistake we made." And with those words, the elderly man turned and left, leaving Mark alone with his thoughts and the weight of a decade of absence in the lives of 3 young people who carried his blood. The next morning, Mark woke up in one of the mansion's bedrooms, still wearing the pants from the previous night's suit. His cell phone showed dozens of missed calls from partners, friends, and especially from Jennifer. There was also a message from Sarah with the name of Ryan's doctor and the hospital contact. Without thinking twice, he called his assistant and cancelled all commitments for the week. Then he headed to St. Vincent's Hospital in Bethesda, where Sarah had mentioned Ryan was being treated. He needed to understand exactly what was happening with his son. The words still sounded strange in his mind, and what he could do to help. At the hospital, he discovered that Ryan was admitted for a new battery of tests. The responsible physician, Dr. Martin Fuller, explained the situation with the necessary gravity. Ryan's aplastic anemia is at an advanced stage. Blood transfusions and medication treatment are no longer sufficient. He needs a bone marrow transplant in the coming months. "And am I compatible?" asked Mark, feeling a lump in his throat. "We need to run tests to confirm, but as the biological father, there's a significant chance. If you are compatible, the procedure is not simple. It requires commitment, hospitalization, and rigorous follow-up after donation." Mark nodded, processing the information. "I'll do whatever is necessary. You can start the tests today." Upon leaving the office, he found Sarah in the hallway. She looked tired, with deep circles under her eyes that betrayed sleepless nights. "You came," she said, with a slight tone of surprise. "Of course I came. I'm ready to take the tests." The doctor explained the severity of the situation to me. Sarah sighed deeply. "Ryan is in room 312 if you want to see him. Michael and Emily are with him." Mark hesitated. What would he say to these young people who had never been part of his life? How could he establish a connection now when one of them was fighting for his life? "Do they know I'm here?" "Yes. Ryan is eager to get to know you better. The others, well, they're more reserved." Walking down the white antiseptic corridor, Mark felt completely stripped of his usual confidence. He was no longer the successful businessman, the man who firmly led meetings and closed million-dollar deals. He was just an absent father, confronting the consequences of his choices. Upon entering the room, he saw Ryan reclined in the hospital bed. Despite his paleness and evident fragility, the boy's smile lit up his face when he saw Mark. Michael, who was sitting near the window, only briefly raised his eyes, showing no emotion. Emily, on the other hand, stood up from her chair with a defensive expression. "Hello," said Mark, feeling uncomfortably inadequate. "How are you feeling, Ryan?" "I've had better days," the boy replied with a slight smile. "But the doctors say I have good chances with the transplant. I already spoke with Dr. Martin. I'll take all the necessary tests today." An uncomfortable silence settled in the room. Emily crossed her arms, staring at Mark. "You don't have to do this if it's just out of obligation," she finally said. "We don't want your pity." Ryan gently warned. "No, Ryan. He needs to know. We survived 15 years without him. If he's going to help, it should be because he wants to, not because he feels guilty or because all of Lancaster society now knows he abandoned us." The girl's frankness was cutting, but Mark knew she had every right to be angry. "You're right, Emily," he replied, keeping his voice firm. "I can't go back and change what I did, nor will I pretend that I appeared in your lives by my own choice. But I'm here now, and I want to help, not only with the transplant, but also with everything else you might need." Michael, who had remained silent until then, finally spoke. "And afterward, when Ryan is cured, will you go back to your perfect life and forget we exist again?" It was a fair question, for which Mark didn't have a ready answer. His life had turned upside down in less than 24 hours. Jennifer was probably considering divorce, his partners would be concerned about the scandal, and now he was facing 3 teenagers who had every right to mistrust his intentions. "I don't know what the future holds," he admitted honestly, "but I know I don't want to miss the chance to get to know you if you'll allow me. I understand if you don't trust me. I don't deserve your trust yet, but I'm willing to earn it." Ryan smiled again, a smile that very much resembled Sarah's. "I think that's a good start," he said, extending his hand to Mark. Hesitantly, Mark approached and held his son's hand. It was thin and cold, but the grip was surprisingly firm. "What happened to your wife?" asked Emily, still keeping her distance. "She seemed quite upset yesterday." "I'm not sure," Mark replied with sincerity. "She's not answering my calls. I believe she's processing all of this, just like I am." "She seemed nice," commented Ryan. "She talked to us yesterday after you fainted, said she would help us in any way she could, regardless of what happened between you two." Mark felt a pang in his chest. It was typical of Jennifer, always principled and compassionate. That's what had attracted him to her from the beginning. "I'm going to take the tests now," he said, changing the subject. "Will you be staying?" "Here at the hospital. Mom has a shift today," explained Michael, speaking more than he had until then. "Emily and I are going home after lunch, but we'll be back tonight to stay with Ryan." "I see. Would you accept having dinner with me tonight after I finish the tests?" asked Mark, surprising himself with the invitation. The 3 siblings looked at each other, having one of those silent conversations that only those who grew up together can have. "That could work," Emily finally replied, still with reservations. "But nothing too fancy. We're not used to luxury restaurants." Mark felt simultaneously embarrassed and touched by the simplicity of the request. "Of course, you choose the place." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Leaving the room, Mark was directed to the laboratory, where he would undergo the first compatibility tests. While waiting, he checked his phone again. More missed calls, and now a text message from Jennifer. "I'm at my sister's house in Georgetown. I need time to think. I hope you're doing the right thing for your children. Jay." It wasn't exactly a reconciliation, but at least she had made contact. He quickly responded, "I understand you need space. I'm at the hospital doing tests for the transplant. I discovered that Ryan is hospitalized. I want to do what's right. I miss you. Can we talk when you're ready?" While waiting for the blood collection, Mark reflected on how his life had been built on a foundation of omissions and lies. Not only on the part of his mother, who had directly interfered in his destiny, but also by his own cowardice in never having looked for Sarah to find out the result of the pregnancy. The tests took most of the day. By late afternoon, he was informed that preliminary results would be available in 48 hours, but more specific compatibility tests would take about 2 weeks. The transplant, if he was compatible, would be performed as soon as possible considering Ryan's condition. As agreed, he met with the 3 siblings for dinner. Sarah had arrived at the hospital and would stay with Ryan during the night. Michael suggested a pizzeria nearby, which they had frequented since they were small. It was a simple family place, very different from the sophisticated restaurants Mark used to frequent in Chicago. During dinner, the teenagers gradually began to open up. Michael, the most reserved of the 3, revealed himself to be an enthusiast of chess and mathematics. Emily spoke passionately about her dream of becoming a doctor, inspired by her brother's condition and her mother's profession. And Ryan, even sick, demonstrated an optimism and good humor that moved Mark. "How different you all are from each other," he commented at one point. "We're fraternal triplets," explained Emily. "Technically, we were generated from different eggs fertilized in the same period. It's rarer than identical triplets." "We're different in everything except our faces," joked Michael. "That, unfortunately, we inherited from you." It was the first time one of them had made a joke, and Mark felt a small advance in that relationship that was so recent and fragile. "Your mother did an incredible job raising you," he said sincerely. "You are extraordinary. It wasn't easy. For her? Emily replied, suddenly serious. She worked 2 jobs for years to pay for our education. Only after she secured the position at the university hospital did things improve a bit. And even then, when Ryan got sick, the medical bills piled up, added Michael. Mom never complained, but we could see how much she worried. Why did you never look? Mark began, but interrupted himself. Why did we never look for you to ask for help? Completed Ryan, raising an eyebrow exactly as Mark did. Mom has a lot of pride, and she always said she wanted us to approach you out of love, not necessity. Mark again felt diminished before the integrity of the woman he had abandoned so long ago. And now? Emily asked abruptly. What will you do when you find out if you're compatible or not? If I'm compatible, I'll donate immediately, Mark replied without hesitation. And regardless, I want to help you. With medical expenses, with education, with whatever is necessary. We don't want your money, Michael said firmly. We want to know if you're going to want to be a real part of our lives. The question was direct and simple, but the answer was complicated. Mark had an established life in Chicago, a company to manage, a marriage in crisis to try to save. How could he promise something he didn't know if he could fulfill? I want to be part of your lives, he finally replied. But I need to be honest. I don't know how that will work in practice. My life is in Chicago, you're here. My marriage is hanging by a thread. I have a lot to resolve. But one thing I can promise, I will never be absent as I have been until now. The 3 seemed to evaluate the answer, each in their own way. Ryan was the first to nod. That's fair, he said. Nobody expects you to drop everything overnight. We just want honesty. The conversation flowed more easily after that, with the teenagers telling stories from their childhood and Mark sharing a bit about his professional journey. They weren't a reunited family, not yet, but it was a start. When dropping them off at home, a small but comfortable apartment in a residential neighborhood of Bethesda, Mark felt both exhausted and strangely satisfied. There was something comforting about meeting these young people who carried not only his genes, but also parts of his personality blended with Sarah's strength and kindness. At the hotel where he was staying, he found a message from Jennifer. I spoke with Sarah today. She told me more about Ryan's condition and how their life has been. Mark, I want to help these kids, regardless of what happens between us. I don't know if I can forgive the way you ran from responsibility in the past, but I admire that you're trying to do the right thing now. I need more time. The message brought a mixture of relief and concern. On one hand, Jennifer hadn't completely ended the dialogue. On the other, it was clear that his marriage was in serious jeopardy. He responded by thanking her for her understanding and informing her that the preliminary results would be out in 2 days. Lying on the hotel bed, Mark rethought every moment of the last 2 days. How was it possible that his life had changed so drastically in such a short time? He had gone from an apparently accomplished man, about to renew vows with the perfect wife, to a father discovering 3 teenage children, one of them seriously ill, while his marriage was crumbling. The next day, he decided to visit Ryan in the hospital again. Upon arriving, he found Sarah leaving the room, apparently exhausted after the night shift. How is he? Asked Mark. He had a fever during the night. The doctors adjusted his medication, and now he's more stable. He's sleeping. You look tired. Would you like me to take you home? Sarah hesitated, clearly not used to accepting help from Mark. That's not necessary. Michael will come to get me in half an hour. Sarah. Mark took a deep breath. I know it's too late to apologize, but I'm sorry for everything. For leaving, for not trying to find out about the pregnancy, for all these years. She looked at him for a long moment before responding. When I discovered I was expecting triplets, I was terrified. I didn't know how I would raise 3 babies alone. Your mother appeared with an offer that seemed like the solution to all my problems. Enough money to start a new life, away from Lancaster, on the condition that I never contact you again. She paused, as if evaluating whether she should continue. I accepted the money because I was desperate, but I promised myself that I would never hide from my children who their father was, that I would always tell them about you without resentment, so they could form their own opinions. And that one day if they wanted to meet you, I wouldn't prevent it. You're an amazing woman, Sarah, said Mark with sincere admiration. I was a complete idiot for not seeing that 15 years ago. She gave a small, tired smile. We were young. You had dreams, ambitions. Maybe things had to happen this way. Not for Ryan, Mark replied, feeling the weight of his son's illness. If I had been present, maybe we would have discovered it earlier, started treatment sooner. Don't torture yourself with that. Ryan's aplastic anemia was diagnosed 2 years ago. There was no way to know earlier. The important thing is that you're here now. At that moment, Michael arrived to pick up his mother. He looked at Mark with suspicion, but was polite enough to greet him with a nod. Go home and rest, Mark told Sarah. I'll stay here with Ryan. If he wakes up, I'll tell him you'll be back later. Sarah seemed to ponder for a moment, then nodded. Thank you. I'll be back in the late afternoon. As Michael and Sarah departed, Mark silently entered Ryan's room. The teenager was sleeping peacefully, although his paleness and the marks of the disease were evident. He sat in the chair beside the bed, observing the son he had never known. It was strange how fate had conspired to reunite them in the worst possible way. A serious illness, a ruined party, an exposed family secret. But perhaps something so dramatic was necessary to force him to face the consequences of his past choices. He stayed there for hours, watching his son sleep, thinking about all he had missed. The first steps, the first words, the birthdays, the school achievements, precious moments he could never recover. Ryan woke up in the middle of the afternoon, surprised to find Mark beside his bed. You stayed here all this time, he asked, his voice still hoarse from sleep. Yes, your mother needed to rest, so I offered to stay with you. Don't you have a company to run or something? I do, but my partners are handling everything for... Now you're more important. Ryan smiled, seemingly genuinely happy with the response. You know, I always imagined what it would be like to meet you, he said, adjusting himself in bed to a more comfortable position. Mom would show old photos and tell stories of when you were young. What stories did she tell? Asked Mark, curious. About how determined you were, how you worked at Grandpa Harold's pharmacy after school, how you had dreams of building great things. She never spoke badly of you, you know? Even when Emily and Michael would get upset on Father's Day, she always said that one day we would understand. Mark felt a lump in his throat. Your mother is an extraordinary person. She is, agreed Ryan, but it wasn't always easy. There were difficult times. Like when you discovered the disease. Ryan suddenly became serious. That was 2 years ago. I started feeling very tired, bruised easily, had frequent nosebleeds. At first, the doctors thought it was anemia, but then the test showed it was something more serious. And how did you handle it? Like any teenager, I guess. I was angry at first, then scared, then determined to fight. Mum was my rock, and Emily and Michael never left my side. The nurse came in to check Ryan's vital signs and administer the afternoon medication. When she left, he continued the conversation. And your wife, Jennifer, right? She seemed nice. She is, confirmed Mark. We're complicated at the moment. She's having difficulty processing all of this. I understand. It must be hard to discover that your husband has 3 children he never mentioned. Ryan's sincerity was disconcerting. There was no bitterness in his words, just a factual observation. You don't seem angry with me, observed Mark, unlike your siblings. Oh, they're coming around, Ryan replied with an understanding smile. Emily's the toughest, but she softens with time. Michael is more reserved, but when he opens up, he's the most loyal of the 3. Give them time. And you? Why aren't you angry? Ryan was silent for a moment, as if really considering the question. Maybe because I always felt that one day we would meet. Or maybe because facing death gives you a different perspective on forgiveness and second chances. Mark felt diminished before his son's maturity. How could someone so young be so wise? I hope I deserve this second chance, he finally said. We all do, Ryan replied simply. They spent the rest of the afternoon talking. Ryan told about school, his friends, his taste for literature and history. Mark talked about his engineering projects, the difficulties of the beginning of his career, how he had met Jennifer during the construction of a hospital in Chicago. It was a peaceful conversation, as if they were trying to compress 15 years of absence into a few hours. Sarah returned in the late afternoon, accompanied by Emily. Both seemed surprised to find Mark and Ryan laughing at an anecdote. "It seems you two got along well," commented Sarah, with a small smile. "He's not as bad as you said, Em," teased Ryan, looking at his sister. Emily rolled her eyes, but there was a slight smile on her lips. "I just said I don't easily trust someone who abandoned us for 15 years. That doesn't make me a bad person." "No, it doesn't," agreed Mark. "It makes you a sensible person. Trust needs to be earned." Mark's cell phone rang. It was Jennifer. Excusing himself, he left the room to answer. "Hi," she said, her voice sounding distant. "Hi. It's good to hear your voice. How are things there? Any news about the tests?" "Not yet. The preliminary results will be out tomorrow. Ryan had a fever yesterday, but he's better today." "That's good," she replied, seeming genuinely relieved. "Mark, I've been thinking a lot. About us. About this whole situation." Mark felt his heart race. He feared what would come next. "I understand. That you're hurt." "It's not just hurt," she interrupted. "It's disappointment. Broken trust. You made me believe we were soulmates, that we shared everything. And now I discover that you hid something so fundamental. How can I be sure there aren't other secrets?" "There aren't," he affirmed vehemently. "I swear, Jennifer, this was a long time ago before I met you. I was young, immature, scared of the idea of being a father. I made a terrible mistake, and now I'm trying to correct it." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "I don't know if I can go through this with you, Mark. I don't know if I trust who you really are. Please don't make any decisions now," he begged, feeling desperation grow. "Come to Bethesda, get to know the kids better, see what I'm trying to do here." "I already talked to Sarah," Jennifer replied. "She told me everything, from the beginning. How you left without looking back. How your mother paid her to disappear. How she raised 3 children alone while you built your empire." Mark felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. "I didn't know, Jennifer. I swear I didn't know about the money, about the triplets." "But you knew about the pregnancy," she replied, her voice now firm. "You ran when she told you she might be pregnant. And you never tried to find out. That's what I can't get over." He closed his eyes, not knowing what to say. It was the truth. He had left Lancaster knowing Sarah suspected she was pregnant and never tried to contact her to confirm. "I know," he finally said, "and there's no excuse for that. I need more time, Mark. I'll stay with my sister for now. Keep me informed about the test results and take good care of those kids. They deserve it." Before he could respond, she hung up. Mark remained in the hallway for a few minutes, trying to compose himself before returning to Ryan's room. When he returned, he found Emily sitting on the edge of the bed, showing something on her phone to her brother, while Sarah organized medications on the side table. "Everything okay?" asked Sarah, noticing his expression. "That was Jennifer," he replied. "We're complicated." Sarah nodded, understanding. "I imagine it's difficult for her." "You spoke with her?" asked Mark, remembering what Jennifer had said. "Yes, she called me this morning. Wanted to know more about Ryan and his illness. We ended up talking about everything." Mark didn't know how to feel about this. It was strange to imagine his wife and his ex talking about him, about the past he had tried to leave behind. "She said she will help Ryan regardless of what happens between you two," added Sarah. "She seems to be a good person." "She is," agreed Mark, feeling a pang of regret for the suffering he was causing Jennifer. Sarah's phone rang. It was Dr. Martin. After a brief conversation, she hung up with a worried expression. "The preliminary results of your tests came out early," she said, looking at Mark. "The doctor wants to see us tomorrow morning." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting. Now continuing. The night passed slowly. Mark returned to the hotel but could hardly sleep, anxious for the test results. The next morning, he arrived at the hospital even before Sarah and was received by Dr. Martin in his office. "The preliminary results are promising," announced the doctor when Sarah also joined them. "The blood type is compatible, as well as the initial genetic markers. We need to do more specific tests to confirm, but the chances are quite favorable." Mark and Sarah exchanged looks of relief. "What happens next?" asked Mark. We need to do the complete compatibility tests, which takes about 2 weeks. If compatibility is confirmed, we'll begin preparations for the transplant. Ryan will need a conditioning regimen to prepare his body, which includes high-dose chemotherapy, to destroy the diseased bone marrow cells. It's an intense process and not without risks. And for me? Asked Mark. For the donor, the procedure is relatively simple. It involves collecting stem cells from peripheral blood or, in some cases, directly from the bone marrow. There's some discomfort, but nothing compared to what the patient faces. After the consultation, they went together to Ryan's room to give the news. The teenager was awake with Michael by his side. "So, I'm going to get a bit of your DNA again," joked Ryan when he heard about the positive preliminary results. "It seems so," replied Mark, emotional. "The doctor said the chances are good, but we need to wait for the complete tests." "Does this mean you'll be staying around longer?" asked Michael, his usual reserve slightly softened. "Yes. I'll alternate between here and Chicago to resolve some company issues, but I'll be present throughout the entire process." In the 2 weeks that followed, a routine was established. Mark spent most of his time in Bethesda, visiting Ryan daily and gradually getting closer to Michael and Emily as well. On weekends, he took them out, movies, parks, even a day at the beach when Ryan was briefly permitted to leave the hospital. Jennifer remained distant, although they exchanged daily messages. She had returned to Chicago to take care of professional matters, but promised to return for the transplant, regardless of the situation between them. His mother, Mrs. Eleanor, tried to contact him several times, but Mark wasn't ready to forgive her for the interference that had changed the course of so many lives. His father, however, traveled to Bethesda to meet his grandchildren, an emotional encounter that surprised Mark by the naturalness with which Mr. Harold interacted with the teenagers. "They are extraordinary," said the elderly man when they were alone. "Sarah did an incredible job." "Yes, she did," agreed Mark, "and I missed all of it." "Not all," his father corrected. "You still have time to build something meaningful with them. Don't make the same mistake I did, keeping secrets and living with regrets." When the final results confirmed compatibility, it was as if a great weight had been lifted from everyone's shoulders. The transplant was scheduled for the following week, initiating intense preparations. Ryan would be admitted to isolation for the conditioning regimen, while Mark would undergo a stimulation process to increase stem cell production before collection. On the eve of Ryan's admission, Mark organized a special dinner in his hotel room, which had a small living area. He invited Sarah, the 3 children, his father, and, to his surprise, Jennifer, who had returned to Bethesda as promised. It was the first time everyone was gathered in a controlled environment without the weight of public revelation or the hospital environment. Initially, there was palpable tension, especially between Jennifer and Sarah, and between Mark and his children. But as the evening progressed, the barriers began to dissolve. Jennifer, always sociable and warm, quickly captivated Michael with a conversation about books. Sarah and Mr. Harold discovered common interests in gardening, and Emily, surprisingly, opened up to Mark about her plans for medical school. At one point in the evening, when Ryan stepped away to take his medication, Mark found himself alone with Jennifer for the first time since the disastrous party. "Thank you for coming," he said sincerely. "I promised I would be here for them regardless of us," she replied, her tone softer than in their latest conversations. "And what about us?" Jennifer looked around the room, where Sarah was now animatedly talking with Emily and Michael, while Mr. Harold and Ryan played cards. "I don't know, Mark. I see you differently with them, more authentic perhaps, as if you finally found a part of yourself that was missing." "They make me want to be better," he admitted. "They make me question all the choices I've made, all the values I've prioritized." "That's good," she said with a small smile. "Seeing you like this, committed, willing to rebuild, makes me think that maybe there's hope for us too. But not now. Now the focus needs to be Ryan and the transplant." Mark nodded, respecting her position. It was more than he expected, considering how they had separated. The night ended with an atmosphere of cautious hope. They weren't a traditional family, far from it, but there was the beginning of something that could become meaningful for everyone. The next day, Ryan was admitted to begin the conditioning regimen. The coming days would be difficult, with intense reactions to chemotherapy, but he maintained his unshakable optimism. Mark began his own preparation process, taking medication to stimulate stem cell production. A week later, the day of collection arrived. Mark was admitted in the morning, and the procedure lasted several hours. As he had opted for peripheral blood stem cell donation, he didn't need general anesthesia, just light sedation. Still, the process left him tired and with body aches. When he woke up in recovery, he found Jennifer by his side. "How are you feeling?" she asked, holding his hand. "Like I've been hit by a truck," he replied with a weak smile. "But it was worth it. Did they get enough cells?" "Yes. The doctors are very optimistic. The transplant will be performed this afternoon." Mark tried to sit up, but felt a wave of dizziness. "I want to be there." "You need to rest," Jennifer insisted. "Sarah is with him, and Michael and Emily too. Your father went to pick up your mother from Lancaster." "My mother?" Ryan asked to meet her, said there was no point in moving forward with past grudges. Mark felt a wave of admiration for the son he barely knew, but who demonstrated wisdom beyond his years. "He's amazing, isn't he?" "Yes, he is," agreed Jennifer with tears in her eyes. "They all are. You were an idiot to give them up." "The biggest mistake of my life," agreed Mark. Jennifer squeezed his hand, and he saw there a glimpse of the connection they had shared before everything crumbled. In the late afternoon, against medical recommendations, Mark insisted on being taken in a wheelchair to the bone marrow transplant unit to follow the procedure. Ryan was isolated, protected in a sterile environment, but they could see him through a glass window. The teenager smiled and gave a thumbs up when he saw Mark arriving. The stem cell infusion was in fact a simple procedure, similar to a blood transfusion. The real challenge would come in the following days, when Ryan's body would struggle to accept the new cells and regenerate his bone marrow. Everyone watched in silence as the bag containing Mark's stem cells was connected to Ryan's central catheter. It was a solemn, almost sacred moment, the literal sharing of life between a father and son who had never lived together. Mark felt a hand on his shoulder, and turning around saw his mother, Mrs. Eleanor, standing behind him with teary eyes. "I'm so sorry, son," she said softly, "for everything." He didn't respond, but neither did he push her hand away. There were many wounds to be healed, many difficult conversations to be had. But at that moment, as they watched life literally flowing from one to the other, the past seemed less important. The following days were filled with apprehension. Ryan faced the expected side effects, nausea, fever, extreme weakness, but remained resilient. Mark recovered quickly from the donation and practically moved into the hospital, taking turns, with Sarah to stay by his son's side. 1 week after the transplant, the first signs came that the stem cells had taken. Ryan's blood cell count began to rise slightly, indicating that the new marrow was producing. 2 weeks later, the results were even more promising. Throughout this period, a strange and unlikely family formed in the hospital corridors. Sarah and Jennifer developed a friendship based on mutual respect and shared concern for Ryan. Michael and Emily began to look at Mark, not as the stranger who had abandoned them, but as someone genuinely trying to repair his mistakes. And Mark discovered a new version of himself, more humble, more present, more aware of what really mattered. A month after the transplant, Ryan was discharged from the hospital. He would still need rigorous monitoring, frequent hospital visits, and special care at home. But the most critical phase had passed. The doctors were optimistic about his complete recovery. On the eve of discharge, Mark asked to speak privately with Ryan. "I wanted to thank you," he said, sitting on the edge of his son's bed. "For what?" asked Ryan, surprised. "You're the one who saved me." "No, you saved me. You and your siblings. You showed me what I had lost, what really matters." Ryan smiled, that smile that so much resembled Sarah's. "You know what I always dreamed of?" he asked. "It wasn't having a rich, famous, or important father. It was simply having a father who cared, who would come to my basketball games, who would help me with homework, who would advise me about girls." Mark felt tears forming in his eyes. "I missed all that." "Not all," Ryan corrected. unconsciously repeating the words Mr. Harold had said weeks before. I still have many games ahead. Michael and Emily too, we have plenty of time to catch up. That night, Mark made a decision. He talked at length with Jennifer, who had decided to temporarily stay at her apartment in Georgetown. Then he met with his partners in a video conference. On the day of Ryan's discharge, when everyone was gathered in the hospital room, Sarah, Michael, Emily, Jennifer, his parents, Mark made an announcement. I'm opening a branch of the construction company. Here in DC, I bought an apartment in the same building as yours, he said, looking at Sarah and the children. If you'll allow me, I want to be present in your lives from now on, not to replace everything you've built without me, but to add to it. There was a moment of surprised silence, broken by Ryan. Does that mean I have to put up with you every day? He joked, although his eyes shone with emotion. Only if you want, Mark replied. All of you. I know I've broken everyone's trust here, in different ways. I know I can't just come back and pretend the last 15 years didn't happen, but I want the chance to build something new, something better. Sarah was the first to respond. Our children deserve to have you in their lives, Mark. And you deserve to know them. It won't be easy, but I'm willing to try. Michael and Emily exchanged glances, having another of their silent conversations before Michael spoke. You can come to my chess competitions. No one ever understands. When I try to explain the strategies, it was his way of saying yes. Emily, always the most difficult, simply shrugged. We'll see how you do. Mark didn't expect more than that. There were deep wounds to heal, trust to rebuild. It would be a long process, requiring patience and persistence. But looking at the three teenagers who carried his genes, Ryan with his unshakable optimism, Michael with his quiet intelligence, and Emily with her fierce determination, he knew that any effort would be worth it. Jennifer, who was watching the scene from a distance, approached Mark. I'm proud of you, she said softly. Does that mean? It means I want to see where this goes. You're changing, Mark, and I like the man you're becoming. 6 months later, Ryan was completely recovered. Tests showed his bone marrow was functioning normally, producing all the necessary blood cells. He had returned to school and even resumed playing basketball, although with some limitations. Mark alternated his time between the new office in DC and the company headquarters in Chicago, but spent most days in the city where his children lived. Keeping his promise, he attended Ryan's basketball games, Michael's chess competitions, and occasionally helped Emily study for biology tests, as she was determined to pass the entrance exam for medical school. Jennifer had rented out her Chicago apartment and moved permanently to Georgetown. Her marriage to Mark was under reconstruction, with couples therapy and many honest conversations. It wasn't perfect, but there was progress. Sarah continued working at the university hospital, now as head nurse. She had developed a civilized relationship with Mark, based on mutual respect and shared love for their children. Occasionally, they all dined together, an unconventional family united by bonds that transcended blood. On the one-year anniversary of the transplant, Mark organized a small celebration at Sarah's apartment. Everyone was there. The three teenagers, Sarah, Jennifer, his parents, some close friends. It was a celebration not only of Ryan's cure, but also of the second chances everyone had received. At one point in the evening, Mark found Ryan on the balcony looking at the city lights. A penny for your thoughts, he said, joining his son. I was thinking about how strange fate is, Ryan replied. If I hadn't gotten sick, maybe we would never have met. I'd like to believe we would have met anyway, said Mark, that at some point I would have realized the mistake I made and would have looked for you. Ryan smiled, neither agreeing nor disagreeing. The important thing is that we're here now, and that you're not as bad as Emily thought. Mark laughed. She still has her doubts, I think. Emily will always have doubts about everything. It's part of her charm. Together, they contemplated the view for a few moments. Then Ryan spoke again. You know, when I discovered the disease, I was very afraid. Not of dying exactly, but of losing opportunities, of not living everything I wanted to live. Now I realize that life is like that, full of losses, but also unexpected gains. I lost 2 years fighting against aplastic anemia, but I gained a father. Mark felt his eyes water. He put his arm around his son's shoulders, grateful to be there in that moment. From inside the apartment, Sarah watched them. She smiled, seeing father and son together, talking as if they had spent their whole lives side by side. It was an image she never imagined she would see, but now seemed perfectly natural. Jennifer joined her in silent contemplation. "He's changed," she commented. "Yes," agreed Sarah. "I think we all have." Jennifer hesitated before asking, "Have you forgiven him?" "For everything." Sarah considered the question for a moment. "It's not really about forgiveness, it's more about moving forward, about building something new from the fragments of what was broken. He can never recover the lost years with the kids, but he can create something meaningful from here on, and that's what matters." The two women, so different and yet united by unexpected connections, watched as Michael and Emily joined Mark and Ryan on the balcony. The four talked animatedly, laughing at some inside joke. "They look like a family," observed Jennifer. "They are a family," corrected Sarah. "Different, imperfect, built with pieces that didn't seem to fit together, but a family nonetheless." And as they observed that unlikely scene, both knew it was true. The invitation that should have been a humiliation had transformed into a new beginning. The revelation that should have been a shame had become an opportunity for reconstruction. And the children who should have been a buried secret had become the greatest treasure in the life of a man who almost lost everything to discover what really mattered. The end. So, what did you think of this story of redemption and family? Tell us in the comments if you've ever experienced or know of a situation of reconciliation between parents and children after years of separation. Your opinion is very important to us. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more touching stories like this one.